Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Morrison, and I'm an organizational development consultant with the Learning and Organizational Development Unit. And I'm excited to welcome you into our ACEL to Extension web series that we've been doing this is our third time around. And it's been a wonderful partnership between Extension and the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership. And we've had a lot of great content and sessions come through, and we've got another wonderful one this morning for you. Did want to mention that myself and our colleague Beth Flynn are kind of the main organizers of this program. So if you have future suggestions, comments, concerns, anything, certainly reach out to myself or Beth, and we'll be happy to incorporate that feedback into this series. We will also have a brief evaluation at the end of this session for you to do that too. But moving into today, welcome in everybody, and I'm excited to introduce our presenter, Jeff King, who has been doing work in this area for a while now, and very excited for him to jump into this morning's session on emotional intelligence. So Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And I know we have an hour, so what I'm trying to do, I guess the overall objectives that I hope I leave you with is, again, understanding of emotional intelligence and why it's important. And from a conceptual level, probably most of you have heard the term, so you have that idea. I'd like to plant some seeds underneath that, and then hopefully identify some strategies that help to move you forward to be more effective and engaging. Now, in the chat box, what is emotional intelligence? Now, when you hear that term, what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you hear that term? Emotional intelligence. Your gut feelings, self-awareness, reading the room. What other things come to mind? Emotional intelligence, being empathetic, understand yours and others' emotions. Yeah. Ability to take others' feelings into account with words and actions. Yeah, it's, reading, how do you read the other person? How do you read yourself from a fundamental perspective? Now, when you think of emotional intelligence, and if you've done some reading around it, I just want to have a point of clarification here. You may hear the term emotional intelligence or EQ. Sometimes you hear the term emotional and social intelligence. And sometimes you hear emotional and social effectiveness. What's the difference? Basically, in the literature, these are all interchangeable terms. In the mid-90s, when emotional intelligence really started to hit the spotlight, it was referred to as emotional intelligence. As time went on, it was emotional and social because we realized it's not just about us, it's also about others that we're working with. So that's where that social piece come in. So where did this idea of emotional and social effectiveness come in? Well, the other two relate to intelligence. And if we kind of think of our IQ versus the EQ, IQ, we can change our numbers a bit, but we're not going to have a drastic difference when it comes to trying to improve those scores. But emotional and social intelligence is something you can do something about. You can drastically increase your ability there. So that's the idea of going to effectiveness. And that's really what emotional intelligence is about. How do we more effectively deal with ourselves as well as dealing with others? Now, if I had to give you a formal definition of emotional and social intelligence, this is one for the multi-health system. It's a definition that the assessment we use out of the Leadership Center uses, and it's a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationship, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. Now, if I had to take that definition and graphically describe it to you or graphically show you, here's how I would demonstrate that. First of all, there's an element of our own self-awareness. What we're feeling and why is looking at ourselves. And then it's how do we manage ourselves from that understanding? How do we try to understand the needs and perspective of others? As well as how do we manage the relationship and our terms of engagement with those individuals all around us. And even with those four, we have elements of recognition, recognizing that self-awareness, recognizing others, and then the regulation is how do we manage that? Managing ourselves as well as managing the relationships. In our time here today, I'd really like to walk through emotional intelligence and point out some key elements from these four quadrants, because I think it gives us a little bit more depth of understanding and realize we're going through these individual components, but yet they're going to interchange. They don't happen in boxes necessarily like the illustration here. There's going to be things that cut across. But I think it's a good way to begin to recognize our own insights to emotional intelligence and maybe fine-tuning some of the skills that we currently have regarding the topic. So let's begin with that whole idea of self-awareness. Self-awareness, as we look at a definition of that, our ability to not only understand our strengths and weaknesses, but to recognize our emotions and the impact that they have on you. Now, one of the things that it comes to mind under self-awareness is that strengths and weaknesses. You know, gosh, what is that in emotional and social intelligence? Well, it really builds around our self-regard. How do we feel about ourselves? How do we feel about ourselves? I sometimes get the question, what does self-regard have to do with emotional intelligence? But just think about it. How we feel about ourselves is really a foundation that we're going to build our skills off of. If we question ourselves or take things away from ourselves, we're not going to show up as confident. And when the emotions begin to play a role in that, it's going to inhibit our ability to be even more effective. I think some common questions that come into play here that you could ask yourself around self-awareness. How do you feel about yourself? And that really gets to that strengths and weaknesses. Now, how many of you have strengths? Raise your hand, those of you who have cameras on. How many of you have strengths? All right, yeah, I want to see. How many of you have weaknesses? Yes, it's the idea of knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are and being okay. Knowing our strengths and weaknesses and being okay. And okay doesn't always mean satisfied, because we can begin to hone that. But it's that idea of we all have strengths and weaknesses. How do we use those or minimize the impact of those in the work that we do? So that's really looking at how we feel about ourselves. Are you aware of what you are feeling and why? Now, if you look at that second question there, any idea on why we go beyond just knowing what you're feeling, but also understanding the why? Why do we need both of those in self-awareness? Understand what I'm feeling and why. Anybody can unmute or put something in the chat box. Why? Why those two together? What I'm feeling and why. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Jennifer, so you're able to discern if your emotional reaction is out of scale to the now. Good. Can lead to self-improvement. Allows you to try and avoid the things that trigger. Okay. And these things really come around, Amanda. You can know what impacts your feelings and maybe how to change them. And I think that is fundamentally just knowing what you're feeling. I want to say is not enough, because if I'm frustrated, I'm angry, or even if I'm excited and I don't know why, how do I deal with it? How do I deal with that anger or frustration? Just the emotion. I can't tell myself, oh, just don't have it. When I understand the source of it, okay, what can I do about the source of that to really to begin to change that? So that's why an emotional self-awareness, it's really being aware of your emotions and why. And when we get to the why piece, that's where we can begin to navigate and work around it. That's where we can manage more of a capacity to manage our own behaviors as a part of that. And do you know how the emotions impact you? Kind of that self-reflection that and looking at one another. And are you aware of your triggers? Are you aware of your triggers? Now, what percentage of the population would you say has a good self-awareness about themselves? Go ahead and put in the chat box. What percentage of the population would have a good understanding of self-awareness? 10, 10, 30, 20, 45, 30. Yeah, and if you ask people, yes, I'm really self-aware. There's I want to say a lot of people out there that need a reminder, and sometimes even myself. So I'm not being critical just of others. I think there's times, but 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15 actually are. Now think about that for a moment. Isn't that amazing? Because fundamentally, to change the environment around us or change how we show up for things, it's that self-awareness piece. And we wonder why some people can't improve. It may be they're just not really, they're not doing a good job of being self-aware. Okay, this number just kind of amazes me that there's that many people to some degree lack that overall self-awareness. But another piece from that self-awareness perspective is you see a picture of buttons. You remember in the slide before I said, what are your triggers? Now think for a moment, and on the sheet of paper there in front of you, go ahead and write down, what are those buttons that when people push them, takes you to a place that isn't necessarily real positive? What are those buttons that when people push, you're engaging with them, that start to kind of irritate you? Go ahead and jot a couple of those down. Then I'm going to ask you, a couple of you, to share those. What are some of those buttons? As you're writing those down, one of mine is in class. Of course, this, the webinar here, I can't see faces too much here, but I say something. What is somebody usually in the back of the room? What do? They roll their eyes at me. And I just want to say, oh, why are you rolling your eyes at me? It's probably worse at home, especially in the past when I would talk to my daughters and they would roll their eyes at me. It just takes me to that place where, gosh, I'm irritated, and just kind of that immediate reaction to things. So, whoops. Hannah, Hannah Epley, what's one of the buttons you jotted down? And what reaction? Maybe anyone else?
Sorry, having troubles this morning getting my technology stuff. One of my buttons is when I have the same conversation with someone that we have already had before, and I have to have the same conversation multiple times.
Well, you just weren't clear the first time.
If it's in a meet, see, I'm already getting frustrated, like even explaining this to you. Man, this is bad.
You need to be clear. You need to be clear.
I would say it's like, let's say it's a meeting and we're taking notes, and you've taken, let's say it's you and me, Jeff, and you've taken notes, and then we're like working on a project, and then we come back and we meet again, and we go back, like it's like that meeting never happened because.
Well, I just kind of forgot what happened there. Don't take it personal.
Yeah, that's one of my buttons.
Yeah.
I'm already like feeling myself just like my blood pressure rising, but yeah.
Oh, thank you for letting me put you on the spot. Emily, what about you? Here again, I'm not trying to put people on the spot, but I think rather than just the chat boxes, to get some of you to share, some of your thoughts and ideas here.
I think just a lot of complaining, but not offering solutions sometimes.
Well, it's not my job to give solutions. I'm just supposed to tell you what's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
There's some people that can make a case for everything.
I'm here to help you. Right.
That approach.
Yeah. And thank you, Emily. Thank you, Hannah. Why did I push back on that?
And make us feel the button being pushed.
Yeah, because do they push the button only once? No, they almost go on auto push. So it's that idea. I want you, start to feel a bit of that emotion. And okay, you feel that way. So what? It's that idea of knowing what those buttons are. And then when people push them, don't allow them to control your behavior. Is to be aware, I know that person's probably going to push this button. They push it, and I'm still going to feel that necessarily internal, because I can't tell you not to feel emotions. But that awareness hopefully can lead to, I'm going to react differently to them. So part of the self-awareness is knowing what I'm feeling and why. Okay, I understand that. I'm not going to let them, I want to say, get the best of me. And there's this quote, he who angers you conquers you. He who angers you conquers you. And sometimes when people push those buttons, or they can get us off track and we can get mad, and then we lose our ability to be most effective. And ultimately, this is about how do we have the most effective interactions with people. And sometimes those people are there, they really agitate us. So it's how do we still work to engage with that. That doesn't mean we always have the smile on our face, but it's also that idea of, okay, I'm showing up differently to this conversation. I'm not going to take their bait to go down some other way. I'm going to be in control of my actions, because we still may have the emotion, and it's still okay to have the emotion. It's where that action comes into play there. So just those buttons, and they often go to autopilot. And that's really where that self-management then comes into play. Ability to manage your emotions, particularly in stressful situations, maintain a positive outlook despite the setbacks. So as we see those reactions that we may have, or somebody does something that irritates us, it's just the last straw. But how do we recognize, okay, right now I'm thinking the last straw, how do I manage my reaction to it? Managing a reaction doesn't mean I'm not going to do anything about it. Managing a reaction means, okay, how can we be more intentional about having the best interaction to get to address whatever issue it is? Because it's still getting to fundamentally whatever issue or whatever behavior that we need to deal with, but it's how we manage ourselves. So that whole idea of emotional and social effectiveness begins really fundamentally with awareness of ourselves and how we manage ourselves. Because that management ourselves, well, here's some questions too for the self-management. Can you self-manage your emotions? And it's probably really more our reactions to the emotions. Do you control them, or do they control you? And sometimes that's where that button on autopilot, we don't really necessarily think about it controlling us, but it directs our behavior. And when you decide to start managing, how do you be intentional about the reaction to those elements there? And some of you probably, if you've had a class with me or another workshop, you've seen this results cone, because I think fundamentally it's a good mental model to help keep us in mind from that self-management and reaction perspective. So the results cone is, we get our results from what? Our results come from our behaviors. Our behaviors drive our results. So then what goes at the bottom? What drives our behaviors? Now we're thinking of emotional intelligence. So this element of emotions typically drive behaviors, but we don't want emotions to drive our behaviors. What we want is our thinking to drive our behaviors. So that self-management piece is, okay, I have this emotion. What is the emotion telling me? And then what is the best way to react to it? Does that make sense? It's that idea of thinking. It's not our emotions leading to our behaviors. We have our emotions, and we need to translate it. What is that telling us? I'm frustrated because we've had this conversation over and over again. Now I can show up and say, just get mad and shut it down, or say, gosh, we're having the same conversation before as we did in the past on X date or this date. Do you see how it's more on how we do come back to talk with them, than necessarily what? It's how we do that. So when we think about the results cone and emotions, let your emotions inform. That's why the why is important. How should that impact my thinking? Now, you can still be frustrated. You can still, be upset with somebody. I'm not telling people, because we all have emotions and they're going to play different roles. But it's that idea of what do we do with those? How do we let those inform us? And then there's also, I actually have this hanging up on my wall here as a visual reminder, the results cone and our moods. The right-hand side is the mood elevator. Many of you have seen that. Sometimes our moods are up high, sometimes those moods and feelings are much lower. And what we have to realize is when it comes to the thinking process is the lower moods are going to lead to lower quality thinking. If you get angry or mad at somebody, and then you have to think how I'm going to show up, it's harder to show up in more of a positive way. And that's where sometimes we think, gosh, I'm not in the right mood to have this conversation, that maybe I need to have it some other time. Now, we can't just keep putting it off, but there's just sometimes when somebody, if you're upset and just think, okay, it doesn't have to be handled right now. So I can put it off till tomorrow or even later in the day. Now, sometimes we still have to engage with the conversation. So the idea of the visual here is just to remember your quality of thinking is lower when your moods are lower. So what kind of behaviors does that lead to? That is often where that emotion convinces us we're justified to say or do something that we often wish we didn't later on. It's the emotion that takes over the power in the justification. And then once we change that emotion or we back away from the situation, gosh, I probably shouldn't have said that. And probably is, we shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that, or at least said it in that way. So when I'm aware of that, I can help manage myself. And that's where the red, curious, and interested comes in from this model. I can't change my emotion immediately, but how do I act more interested? And I think at that point, I seem to ask more questions than I do make statements, which sometimes can often help in the course of a difficult conversation. And then, higher moods, there's going to be higher qualities of thinking, and how do we begin to address that? So again, that goes back, let's take a look here, back to emotional self-awareness was, know what I'm feeling and why. And then the self-management piece is, okay, I understand the why, how do I react to it? And this understanding, moods begin to change how we might look at something. So the greater you are aware of that, the more intentional you can be about adjusting behaviors. And here again, when I talk about adjusting behaviors, you still get to the root issue of the behavior, the problem, whatever it's at. It's often how you get there, how you show up to the conversation to ideally be most effective with that. And really that comes to impulse control or self-control, ability to resist or delay impulse. What's wrong with this statement here? Those of you in 4-H and shooting sports, what's wrong with this? Yeah, how often in conversations do we approach it ready, fire, aim, when it really should be ready, aim, fire? And I think that's a way to kind of think through our interactions and how we manage ourselves, is to develop almost like a speed bump in a reaction to give us time to think through and act in the best way. And when I say the best way, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect. We're still going to have those times that we trip up. And we need to just try to learn from those. But it's that idea, it's not about perfection here. It's about your awareness and how we can begin to increase our overall effectiveness. So the third component here is looking kind of at that role of others. There again, the others were also incorporated in those first two, just on how we react. But the social awareness, ability to recognize others' emotions and the dynamic in play within an organization and or a unit. Just kind of be able to read the environment there. Ability to recognize play in an organization or unit. That doesn't mean it's right, because some environments may not be the best. It doesn't mean it's right, but you understand the dynamics that are at play. And then how do we best navigate through those. So there again, it's that idea that maybe they're not ideal, but it should inform us on what is the best way to navigate through that. And some questions here that would be good ones to ask yourself is, can you empathize? What are they feeling and why? Where did you hear feeling and why? We said that earlier with emotional self-awareness. So when it comes to empathy or being empathetic to others, we're trying to put ourselves in their shoes, better understand what they're feeling and why. Again, why do we go to why? Why are we going to the why? Was somebody going to go ahead? Why do we go to the why? Let's see, to get to the root. Try to understand what's going on. Because if we're going to work with the individual, if we want to begin to help them navigate through a difficult situation, that they have great anxiety, we have to understand the why, and that's where we can begin to help them to navigate that. That's where we can have the greatest influence. And sometimes they may not even realize, gosh, why am I upset? They're just, they know the emotion. But when we try to discover the why, that's where we can have the focus, because you may not agree with what they're feeling. Well, you shouldn't feel that way. That's wrong. It's the idea, empathetic is understanding things from their perspective. Understanding things from their perspective. You don't have to agree to it. And you can know that there's a key piece of that is, are you able to listen and fully? How many of us listen? How many of us listen well? There's probably times that well, I know there's not probably, there are times that I listen better than others. So it's just that reminder of, gosh, how do we approach the situations with that? And we often, unfortunately, we often listen with the intent to reply. We can't wait till they take a breath so we can jump in and say, I agree with you. Or no, you're wrong. But that listening is really trying to dial things back a bit and really trying to look at what do they feel and why about the situation. It's still usually tied to some context, some situation there. And to remember that understanding is not the same as agreeing. When you seek to understand somebody else's perspective and you think they're completely wrong, how does that change your thinking? It's the idea, I'm trying to understand their perspective. I don't have to agree with it. And I think many times when it gets into discussions, we believe we get back and forth on this. No, your understanding is wrong. You're wrong. Your feelings are wrong. No, feelings and situations are viewed from that person. When we understand why, then we can begin to navigate that. Now, if we go back to the results cone, now just think two different ways to think about that situation, two different ways to think about it. One being, if you judge their feelings as wrong, if that is filled in your thinking, what behaviors follow that versus approach without a judgment of wrong, but of understanding or seeking understanding. Now just think for a moment, how does that impact your thinking? And then what behaviors then follow that? Usually the things, if we're thinking from their wrong perspective, we get into this back and forth, almost a combat mentality, versus when we seek understanding, we're more in a process of asking questions, seeking clarification to understanding to be able to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean once we understand their perspective, that doesn't mean we can say the behavior that they displayed was still wrong. But you see how you're approaching it from a little bit different perspective of seeking to understand that engagement of back and forth. We may say, I acknowledge that you believe this, but the behavior is not in line with a standards of behavior. The behavior is not aligned with whatever criteria may be used in the situation. Again, it doesn't prevent us to get to the root cause, but that's where that emotional and social effectiveness comes into play. And I think we can see the impact on our thinking, the impact on our thinking and how that can begin to impact the behavior there. And then the last component here is relationship management. Relationship management, your ability to influence, coach, and mentor others and resolve conflict effectively. And some key questions that come into play here. Are you able to shape the outcomes of social interactions? Can you effectively work with others to make decisions? Are your nonverbal interactions, smooth, kind of that interaction piece? You see, as we were talking about it in the previous slide, that idea of how we show up our thinking, and then this is the behavioral piece. If we go back to this slide or back to the social, that is that kind of the understanding, and then the management gets to the so what. What do I react to that? How do I begin to work through the situation? How do I work through to identify the problem and work through that particular piece there? And one of the easiest things that I think we can be aware of in that reaction is when there's more of that emotional tone, how do people read? What are we communicating in those times of conversation? What percentage are people are using our words? What percentage are they using our tone of voice? What percentage are they using our body language? If you have 100%, how do you break that down? I know some of you have seen this before, but it's a good mental reminder to all of us. Gosh, if I'm interacting with others and I'm talking with a coworker, I'm talking with a peer, I'm talking with a supervisor or a subordinate, and there's a little bit of an emotional piece there of anxiety or frustration, how are they reading you? How are they reading you? I'm going to put some numbers in the chat box. How would you take 100% and break that down? 10, 10, 80, 10, 20, 70, 5, 20, 75. One of the consistent things that I see as far as those of you that are putting in numbers have been pretty much that the body language is the highest. Some are 90% body language. Yes, okay. Yeah. And remember, this is more when there's that emotional charge that can be a part of it. And the answer is 7% words, 38% tone of voice, and 55% body language. So, and I'm not saying, I mean, that we can almost discount words in this, I guess, looking at this slide, words are still important, but you see as much, it's how you deliver the words, how you deliver the words, the tone. If you're frustrated, what's your frustrated voice sound like? And I'm not saying you can't sound frustrated, but we over exaggerate it. Because if you are really frustrated with a situation, I don't want you to go into that conversation, oh, this is great and wonderful, but I got to tell you how much you screwed up. No, that's not, it still can be using shared, I'm frustrated that we're having this conversation, but you watch how it emphasizes the tone. Now, body language, 55%. Now, what I want you to do is, everybody, do you have a cell phone nearby? Because some of you got your cameras on, some of you don't. So, okay, first of all, make that look. What look do you have when you're at the end of your ropes, can't take it anymore, and that person is pushing on auto push? Give us that look. Give us that look. Some of you got cameras on. Let's see it. What happens to your face? What happens to your body language? Amanda, you wouldn't be smiling. I don't think so. Oh,
I can't think about it in like the heat. It's like in the heat of the moment, it just naturally comes out. I'm like trying to think of how that even is. I don't know.
Yeah, we can't, I'm asking to do it on command, but it doesn't happen necessarily on command. But that's why the next time you have that look, I want you to pull out your cell phone and take a selfie. Take a selfie. And before you send it to Jared, I want you to ask yourself, would I talk to me now? would I talk to me now? Because if your words are saying, help me to understand, and your look is, don't you dare say another word, which is going to be more powerful? It's the body language. So that is a part of that emotional and social intelligence is, okay, here's my end goal. I want to better understand. I have to control how I show up. And there again, it's not being fake, because I can still be upset and say, gosh, we've had this conversation, X, Y, Z times. I'm trying to understand why change isn't happening. So I can still have a voice of concern there, but my body language, and my wife and daughters probably called me out on this more than people at work, so I try to be aware of it. There's this look I get in the corner of my eyes, in my corner of my mouth, that I can't do it on command. It's just something that happens that I have to be aware when I'm in those intense conversations, that, gosh, my words can say one thing, but my nonverbals are saying something else. So there again, once you feel that way, take a selfie. Before you send it to Jared, I want you to just ask yourself, would I talk to me now with that? Now, at the same token, I ask you to look at these numbers from your seat, your perspective. Now, let's have them talking to you. Their words and how you interpret it is you're taking mostly their body language. You may have to be careful that you don't overreact to your senses of reading their body language, of trying to dial back to that. This is where, okay, when we understand this, we can control how we show up, but at the same token, watch how you interpret others and try to stay focused on how do I get to that level of understanding or clarity, rather than going off track because I don't like their body language. It's not so much I don't like their body language. I'm reading it as they don't care. And maybe they don't, but I don't want to take the bait to go down that type of conversation. I'm trying to keep it to more of a positive interaction. And Bree, you mentioned I can definitely be oversensitive when people's body language or tone is off. And that's that idea of being aware of this. It's our just natural tendencies at times is to read it that way. It doesn't make it right. So how do we begin to, there again, I want to say put a speed bump in so we can try to better understand. So we can try to better understand, and ultimately, hopefully the ultimate goal is to get to the best resolution or clarity in the situation. It's not to make the other person feel bad. It's not make them feel bad, look bad, whatever that is. Ultimately, our goal should be, what do we get to the best outcome with that. And there again, the emotional intelligence, we looked at these 4 areas. You start to see how they come to play, how they come to life. I want to go, there's one piece missing when we look at this, and it's the term motivation. Because ultimately, we can understand each of these 4 quadrants. But I think there's this piece of, we have to be motivated to want to change. We have to be motivated to want to show up differently to some of our conversations. Even when they're with people that we don't necessarily like having conversations with, or situations. It's easier for me to say, well, they deserve it. They had this coming. Yes, they may have, but it's the motivation of how do I hone my skills? How do I hone those, and how do I begin to show up a little bit different? So it goes beyond just knowledge for all of us. It also goes to that point of, I want to be more effective, and how do I begin to change there with that. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to give you a couple minutes and to think about a recent encounter or decision you made that involves emotions. And just make some notes on how did I do with self-awareness? How did I manage myself? How did I read them? And what was that behavior? So what I'd like you to do is take some recent encounter or decision and briefly kind of walk through each of those 4 quadrants from that emotional perspective. And I have on my computer, it says 9:42. I want to give you 4 minutes to kind of make some notes in those 4 quadrants. And then Jared, if we could just put people randomly, maybe in the breakout room, 2 or 3 to a group, and then just to briefly walk through and share your experiences there. So I'll give you 4 minutes just to make some notes, and then we will put you into breakout rooms just to share your experiences with that. And I think the reason for that is to put your own situations, your own reactions around this framework. I think it brings it to life a little bit differently. So jot down some thoughts or notes. Another minute on some notes. Okay, so we're going to give you about 6 minutes, give or take a little bit, in the breakouts. And what I'd like to have you do is just kind of walk through and share. And here again, the purpose of this is to begin to put our own thoughts and behaviors of situations around the framework to really kind of focus in on us, those things that work well, and maybe some things that may not have worked as well. Okay, so Jared, if you want to go ahead and open or assign the breakouts.
Great. Yep. We'll see you in about 6 minutes. I was just going through it. Occasionally you'll have people jump off and then have somebody alone in a breakout room, but I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably bringing memories back from your training.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah, and I actually just was it 2 weeks ago? Is when I did the team-based one.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. What did you think of that?
It was good. It's much less stringent, I guess, in terms of the training and everything, just because they kind of developed it themselves and it's their own thing. But it's nice. I think I could see us potentially, depending on how much money we have to invest in everything, going and doing that at like either a county or an area level. So just to get like those teams thinking, how are they working or not working together so much. So that's kind of how I could see us using that piece. I don't know that we've ever done that, since we've gone to this area level, truly focused on like how they're all really working together.
Yeah.
The area leaders, some of them are better at that than others. But yeah, there's a big difference in some that are much more content focused, that were tapped to do a management role, versus those who are managers who can also do the content focus, right? With 24, there's variations all along that spectrum, I think. Which is true in any organization.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean,
it is.
It's not unique to us, but
Nope. No.
yeah. This group's pretty engaged in the chat. I can never understand why folks won't unmute though and speak, especially when we all know each other for the most part. We're all, on the same team. It's been an interesting piece for me.
How's the rest of your week look?
Not too bad. We've got the mentor training tomorrow. And then prepping Monday is another one of our road shows down in Caldwell. So I'm going to that one in person. So tomorrow, take care of our training, and then I've got to run into the office and do some printing and things like that.
Okay.
So nothing too heavy.
Yeah, I'm taking off this afternoon and meeting my brother tonight up at Mount Hope, where he's bringing 5 horses down to sell tomorrow.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
yeah.
So helping him sell, he's bringing 5 foals. So
yeah.
So that's what I'll be doing tomorrow.
Sounds good. Just horsing around, huh?
Just horsing around.
Sorry, couldn't help myself.
No, that's get my horse or barn therapy, whatever I want to call it.
Yeah.
I go up to the farm or up to see my mom. I say, yeah, I went up to get my barn therapy in this week.
Yeah, looking forward to relaxing. Last weekend we had a wedding down in North Carolina, so it was a quick turnaround, drive down Friday, have everything going on Saturday, drive back Sunday. So
Yeah.
this weekend's going to be just a kind of a veg out and
Yep.
recoup.
They kind of like take a breather.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Should be coming back.
Yeah. About 20 seconds.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Would anybody be willing to unmute and kind of share how your conversation went? Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
I will go ahead, Dr. King. This is
Oh,
Kayla.
Kayla, yes.
So a conversation with our group, a couple of us got to share, and it was really interesting to hear how the awareness was made from one individual who shared about somebody who they didn't know and how they were reacting versus a situation I shared of having an encounter with somebody I did know and how we manage those things differently based on the level of familiarity with the other individual and also thinking about that relationship. Well, do I need to continue this relationship after this encounter? Or is this the only time I might be engaged with this individual? So those were some thoughts that I had as I listened to another individual share.
Kind of that overall greater awareness of here's other ways to see things, here's decisions I have to make in the process. Good, thanks, Kayla. Who else? Who else would be willing to share? Kind of just insights.
No, this is Frances. We kind of talked about each of our situations were very, I guess, situational or maybe like event based too. And so we talked about the different, mine was a volunteer during Fair Week, and you have to recognize that people's emotions, you're hot, you're tired, whatever, and you have to recognize that their emotions might be different, and but you still have, even though they might not be valid or correct, you still have to recognize that they have those emotions and treat them with respect the best you can, and hope that you did everything, to keep everything equal and equitable and whatever.
Yeah, great thoughts there. Because one of the things that your greatest ability to influence others is how you show up to the situation. And how that influences others is they're going to react to how you show up. If you show up more in a combat mentality, I'm going to win, they're going to react that same way. Sometimes when we show up more to seek understanding, how they react to that. Now you could say, well, that's not going to happen with this person, but it may not always happen the first time, because they're also engaged in a pattern of behavior. They're just used to doing that. So Francis, good thoughts there. One more person. One more.
I think in our group, we talked a little bit about the relationship where you are going to have to see those people over again, and you have sort of a long term need to meet with them, and how, sort of being socially aware, it can help you understand where they're coming from and help you find some of those other common grounds and common interests beyond what the issue or thing is that made you feel, either emotionally good or emotionally bad, and you can move on using those and then not agree on the current subject being talked about, but understand that that's where they are, this is where you are, and you can sort of move on and continue that relationship, even with understanding that you're not going to agree on this particular subject.
A great example, and I think as you seek to understand, you said you often find some common ground. Maybe it's not directly with whatever the issue is, but when we find common ground with people, we're often in a better mindset to how do we work through this? Or if we agree to disagree, we're not angry at the end. So that's where that common ground, I think, and that could come, Patrick, as you said, I think through that understanding piece. And it doesn't always have to be directly related there. So good. Thanks for sharing, some examples. And what I would ask you to, challenge you to do is over the next week, try to be more intentional about self-awareness. How do you manage yourself, understanding others, and relationship management? You and I are patterns of our past behavior. And at times we just need to take and kind of disrupt, I want to say, that pattern to say, okay, how am I doing? Because there's some things I can fine tune. And I think the time to do that is when something is a little we're aware of. This is more at the surface. And if we can kind of watch our interactions through the remainder of the week, over the weekend, and just kind of become more aware, then we can, oh, here's some changes that I may need to make in the process. This was just an example that I shared with decision making. Okay, decisions that you make, and some of those conversations you had were around decisions. Role of emotions, let the emotions inform you rather than the emotions driving the approach. So keep that in mind. It's decisions. That's where you don't want to react emotion based on the emotion. It's really about the understanding. Why do you feel the way you do? How should that inform the decision? That emotion, how does that inform you to move forward versus reacting to the emotion? And that goes back to that results cone. We're talking about they're wrong or we're trying to understand. We show up differently to that. Seeing the situation accurately and knowing when the emotion is impacting your objectivity. Sometimes when things become more, if we can be more frustrated, I saw somebody mentioned, or France's example is around fairs. I can think of some of my greatest conflict conversations happened at the fair with volunteers or with parents. But it's that idea, okay, in the moment, I may have a distorted view. Doesn't mean I'm completely wrong, but I can have a distorted view based on the emotion. And I need to realize that and be more intentional about how I react. And self-control. It's kind of like putting that speed bump in so I can process the information before I react. And I know I'm just about out of time, but wrapping up, at some point in your career, I would encourage you to try to take the EQ assessment just to get kind of individual feedback at the Leadership Center. And Jared's also certified in this particular framework, EQ 2.0. There's a leadership and a general report option. We run the leadership report most often. It can be individual. I would encourage people to start off with the individual, but then if you're interested in further leadership roles, at some point, I encourage you to do a 360. How do other people around you see you? And I think that can often be great insights. It's kind of double checking our own self-awareness. And I'm not gonna go, I don't have time. This is a one page of the report you would get. It breaks down emotional intelligence really into 15 subscales. And then you get feedback on each of these individual items. Today, I approached it more from those 4 quadrants. This breaks it down into, we really like this report because the level of detail. So you not only get these numbers, but you also get feedback on each of those areas. And that's where the wealth of that information. So when I say we recommend at some point you take an EQ assessment, because I think that gives us a different view of ourselves around some of the components that really feed into emotional and social intelligence. The leadership report also ties your results into key leadership characteristics such as authenticity, coaching, insight, and innovation. It rolls up the subcomponents into, here's the insight to your coaching. Here's an insight to your innovation. There again, I know I'm going through this really fast, and I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a taste. Here's the type of feedback that you would receive in that. And this handout is also, a slide is in the handout that Jared had posted when we began. Also, just a little commercial. I do a Leadership Institute around effective coaching and emotional intelligence. It's somewhat of a series. The first session is February 10th, 9 to 12. These are all online. And this introduces that larger framework. And then at the end, you get your results. And then a week to 10 days after that February 10th, we do a one-on-one individual feedback and coaching. Because if you look at all those different components, there's just a lot there. And the idea is, how do we help you process through it? And then we come back together again to kind of bring things together around how do we apply it really to more of our coaching. And coaching, you don't have to be a supervisor to coach, because we coach our peers, we can coach our volunteers. There's just, how do we approach that piece and try to bring that a little bit more to life? And also, Jared you can also follow up with Jared, who's also certified, in that same EQI 2.0. There again, it's not necessarily the magical model, but I just like the way it breaks down the feedback into diagnosing. Okay, if I focus here, here's what I'm going to improve across that. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of your day. And if there's other questions, don't hesitate to drop me an email. Be glad to follow up with anyone who has questions. Jared?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. We really do appreciate your time and effort, both putting the presentation together and being with us here this morning. I did want to call attention to the chat box on two quick things. The first is a survey. So again, if you have suggestions, so a little bit of evaluation of today, but then suggestions for the future. And then the other piece I just put in there is our landing page, which will talk about upcoming sessions, as well as have recordings of past sessions. So our next one coming up is on November 18th, and it's is going to be kind of loosely based on the book that many of you would have received for Extension Annual Conference from David Horsager, The Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results. Brian Raisin is going to be leading a discussion based on that book and trust in general. So again, thanks so much to Jeff for being here today, and to you all for being engaged throughout, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.